I'm back.
I'm right there.
Tan. Looking for the tan.
I can't get it.
Oh.
Very good, for sure.
We're watching out for melanoma, no tan.
Yeah,
I
well,
stayed under the umbrella the whole time.
I know.
Oh,
I would
and
too.
loads of sunblock and big hats.
What's the most
I'm
you
not
think,
getting,
you know, the spray cans of tan, what's the most you think it would cost in a hotel to buy?
And
$20.
$60.
Oh my God.
God.
And they confiscated 2 of my cans, which I brought on my carry-on. So
Oh,
I could have checked the carry-on for that price.
Oh.
where was that? So we'll never go there.
you know, there's stuff in the Torah about this, by the way. You should all know.
Stuff in the
As a
Torah
matter of
about
fact, it's
this.
all live streaming now, so this company is going to really, they're going to get
That's
it.
what's called a ganef.
Yeah, exactly. I got
The
it.
meaning of
Learn
ganef.
to go.
What's
Well, we'll switch
happening to
from
the
that
internet?
mentality a little bit to our celebration of Shabbat. I'm going to take this opportunity to mute everybody. I'm sorry.
We were live streaming?
Your live stuff? No. You got nothing to worry about. Nothing. I'm serious. You're good. Nothing happens. Nobody knows. All right. Good Shabbos, everybody. It's great to see you. It's great to be back together. And tonight it is my honor to welcome Barbara, who's going to light and bless our Shabbat candles tonight. And Barbara, I'm just going to ask you to unmute. Give me 1 second. It'll let you do it now. And anybody who's following at home, you can turn to page 120.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Malak Kolam, Asher Kidshanu, B'mitzvotav, Vitzavanu Lehadik Ner Shel Shabbat.
Amen. All right. Barbara, you want to read it for us in English too?
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat.
Amen. All right, Barbara, thank you so much and for giving us this beautiful background too. Looks great over there, and you did a beautiful job. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
I'm muted this whole time and just talking to myself, I can see. It was a great conversation. I said very, very intelligent things, I'm sure. In any case, most of that was thanking Barbara, and I hope that part at least got through. And Barbara, you did a wonderful job, so thank you. And Candeloran, I think we're going to begin our service on page 128. Now to page 130 to begin Kabbalat Shabbat together. Again, page 130, very top of the page.
Nekan mafanav metona bizmiru
page 132 at the very bottom of the page, or Zarua. We're now to page 134. We're now to page 135, Romamu, the fourth paragraph in Hebrew. And we'll turn now to page 138, Lechadodi, beginning at the top of the page, and again we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs.
Shabbat גם בשמחה וצולה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לחי דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
And we'll turn now to page 140.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. להגיד בבוקר חסדך, באמונתך באלות, עלי הסוד מעלי נבל, עלי עליון וכינור. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך עליון, ולזמר לשמך עליון. צדיק אתה מני פרח, כארץ בלבנון ישגה, שתולים בבית אדוני, וחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו. עוד ינובו בשיבה, דשני ורעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי, מלוא עוולת עמו.
We'll turn now for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ואלמד יברח חירותי ומליך מלכותי, מחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בעגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם על מעמיה יתמרח. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם וינשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי קודשה בריחו, לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירם בעלמה, ויאמרו אמן.
Turn now to page 146 for the Baruch Hu.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Can you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Barechu et Adonai ha-mevorach. Baruch Adonai ha-mevorach le'olam ha'ed, le'olam ha'ed.
Please join with me on the bottom of page 148. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המריב הרבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו למדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח מדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו לאורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם בלילה, מאהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד.
Please join me on the top of page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mi Chamocha.
מלכותך ובניך בוקי היום מפי משה, סהליאנו ואמרו, סהליאנו ואמרו, אדוני עמך לעולם ועד, אדוני עמך לעולם ועד.
161 at the very top of the page.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Hashtiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashtiveinu leshalom. Ve'ha'amidenu, shomreinu lechayim. Ufros aleinu, sukat shlomecha. Hashtiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashtiveinu leshalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm.
Turn now to page 162 at the very top.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת לי נפש, שבת לי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
In a moment, the cantor will help us to begin the Amidah on page 164, and then we will continue silently. And please use this time in whatever way feels most meaningful to you. But again, we'll begin all together on page 164.
Excuse me. Adonai sefatay tiftach, ufi yagid tilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Ay, 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 ay.
thoughts now turn to those in our community, those in our lives who are in need of healing. And in a moment, I'll read our Mishaberach list, but I'll invite you as well, if you have names to share them in the chat, or if you're watching at home, simply to hold your loved ones in your heart. Tonight, we are thinking of Dolores Michka, John Longy, Estella Gass, Sylvia Orn, Irachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chauhan, Samuel Moskowitz, Audrey Lubo, Chaim Leib, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner and Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skitt, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Hannah Ruth Batsara, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Adel Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Batavora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kosov, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klopman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, and Leah Bat Naomi. And we add, of course, all those who've been mentioned in the chat and all those we're holding in our hearts. And we'll invite Cantor Lauren back to the virtual bima to lead us in the Mishaberach on page 371.
Mishaberach Avoteinu, Abraham, Yitzchak, veYaakov. Mishaberach Imotenu, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, veRachel. May the one who bless our mothers, may the one who bless our fathers, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, and bless us as well. Bless us with the power of your healing. Bless us with the power of your hope. May our hearts be filled with understanding and strengthened by the power of your love. Bless us with the vision of tomorrow. Help us to reach out to those in pain. May the warmth of friendship ease our sorrow. Give us courage, give us faith to show the way. Mishaberach Avoteinu, Mishaberach Imotenu. Hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, and bless us as well.
Thank you, Cantor Lauren. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So I imagine, like most of you, at least I hope, this week a lot of us were turning our attention towards a courtroom and towards a decision ultimately in the George Floyd case that many of us have been waiting for and thinking about and contemplating for a long time. And as it so happens, this week we also read in a section of the Torah that really connected to me in a really deep kind of way. And I found a commentary I want to share with you tonight, which really actually turns this particular pasuk, this particular verse, in some ways on its head for me. And I'll try as best as I can to relate it to my sort of thoughts and feelings, not just on the case ultimately this week, but really on a larger consideration that relates to who we are as a country and what we hope and ought to be. So first, I want to start from Torah, and I want to start from, this is a double portion this week, Acharei Mot or Acharei, and the parsha that is known as Kedoshim. And Kedoshim, as you can imagine from the title, tells you a lot about what it's about. It's about this idea of what is sacredness, what is holiness, what is this word kadosh, and how are we meant to act it out in the real world. So we get to, right, one might assume, a point in which the conversation would be solely about the experiences of the Kohanim or the Leviim, the people working in the temple and offering the sacrifices. But the truth is that this parsha, as is the case of really all Jewish halakha and thought and practice, is that there's also many other elements that are tied to it. It's not just about what happens, quote unquote, in the religious sphere. It's about really what is the society about. They're not just trying to build a religion that is holy. the Israelites are trying to build an entire culture, an entire civilization based upon the concept of holiness. So we get in this week's Parsha several psukim, several verses in a row in which there are really very big statements being made. And there's one that I really focused on this week, which will seem at least fairly obvious at the beginning. But as I said, there's a bit of a sort of twist in the way to think about it, which is really quite powerful that I want to share. So it's in the 15th verse of Leviticus in chapter 19. And it begins this way. The whole pasuk is fascinating and interesting in its own right, but I just want to focus on the first few words. And it says, Lo ta'asu avel bamishpat. Okay, lo ta'asu means basically your classic thou shalt not, right? You shall not do. And then the phrasing of the wording is a little bit tricky. There is this word avel, which is can be translated as an injustice, but we'll get a slightly different translation of it, I think, at some point. But it's sort of it's more than just a simple injustice. It's an injustice really against the idea of righteousness as espoused by God. It is one of the worst things that we can do is to commit an avel, right? To commit this idea of an injustice. And it's telling us in particular, lo ta'asu avel ba mishpat. Mishpat is one of the words in Judaism, and in particular in this context, used for decision-making in a judicial capacity. Okay, so while the normal translation of this is you shall not render an unfair decision, the principal idea of this is really talking about in the confines of the judicial world, right? In the courtroom or whatever resembled a courtroom for our ancestors. So principally, this idea again makes perfect sense, right? You shall not render an unfair decision, or as I said, an unjust decision. So here's where the wrinkle comes in, okay? We can read this pasuk, and the first thing we might assume is that this is instruction that is very specific, and it is specific only for a person who finds themselves in the place of being an adjudicator. In other words, really only applicable to judges. And that's really been the way that I've thought about this, or about extending that out to the legal system as a whole. But I've always thought about it through that lens. So I want to share a teaching tonight from it's increasingly becoming one of my favorite commentators, who's known as the Or HaChaim. It's Chaim Ibn Attar, who lived in Morocco, primarily in Morocco in I think the 18th century. And he writes, prolifically, and one of his most fascinating sort of musings is on the Torah portions. So he comments on this, and he relates it as follows. He actually gives several different ways of reading the text, but there's one I want to focus on. So he says in this case, right, we might assume that the purpose of this pasuk, the purpose of this verse, is to instruct judges in how they ought to mete out their decisions in the court. But the Or HaChaim says, well, there's another way to read this. This is actually not a warning for the judges. It's in fact a warning to the litigants. It's a warning to the litigants who are not to try and secure favorable judgment by using ruses. If this were to happen, the Or HaChaim says, it would be considered an avel, an injustice, a perversion of justice. This is the reason the Torah addresses the prohibition in the plural form. In other words, it addresses itself, grammatically speaking, not to an individual, but to individuals. And so this is why the Or HaChaim says that actually it's really referring, in the case of a court, where you're usually dealing with, a judge and then litigants, that it's really referring to the plural, to the litigants themselves. And therefore, you must understand this sentence, avel b'mishpat, as follows. The injustice would occur during judgment. The judge's hand down, seeing that the judge is obligated to arrive at his decision on the basis of the arguments presented by the litigants. In other words, the entire, at least if the courtroom is working the way that it's supposed to, the judge is going to make their decision about a case based upon what the litigants bring forward, okay, what they do. And if their presentation is not truthful, and in particular, if it is purposely manipulative, they have the capacity to affect the judge and the judge's ultimate decision. Okay, this is also the reason that this commandment is followed by the directive not to place obstacles before the blind. Usually the reason a judge arrives at a faulty decision is that one of the litigants has deceived him. Okay, so that may not feel like a radical shift, but for me that was a radical shift, to think of it from that perspective as opposed to the judge. Okay, we tend to focus again, especially in complicated situations, on systems, right? Systems of law, systems of justice, even the representatives of those systems being the judges themselves, or even potentially the jury. Naturally, we look towards those institutions as the decision makers, right? They're the ones that are going to decide whether a situation is just or a situation is unjust. What the Or HaChaim is saying here, and what really the Torah, he says, is saying, and what God is saying, is that actually this is much more the concern for who's bringing the case before the judge and how truthful we are about the matters that are being discussed. It puts the onus, in essence, on us, not on the system. Okay, so now I want to share a more contemporary source to try to bring these pieces together and to connect it to what happened this week in Minnesota. So many of you at this point, I think, are familiar with his writing. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book called Between the World and Me. And it's a powerful book that everyone really should connect with and read in some form or the other. But of course, it deals with the questions at hand in this trial and in the trials of so many and the experiences of the last hundreds of years of what does justice look like in this country, and is it in fact a just situation for everyone? Okay, and so one of the things as we are considering this is, again, our focus tends to be on the system part of it, but I want to just bring a challenge to that idea a little bit from Coates. So of the many, many quotable pieces of his book, he says something really quite interesting and quite powerful and challenging. He says that racism is often rendered as the innocent daughter of Mother Nature, and one is left to deplore the Middle Passage or the Trail of Tears, the way that one deplores an earthquake, a tornado, or any other phenomena that can be cast as beyond the handiwork of men. And this is the key line. But race is the child of racism, not the father. Okay, I'll say that again. Race is the child of racism, not the father. So he's saying two important things here, and I'll try again to tie it back to our teaching about the Torah. But one, our sort of tendency to look at something as complicated as racism and to categorize it as something that is a force of nature, and therefore outside of the bounds of responsibility of human beings. And I think he pokes a very clear hole in that tendency that many of us have to sort of speak about racism and systemic racism in that kind of fashion, that it's just something that's so large and so beyond scale that it's not something that we really can affect on a one-to-one level, which is, of course, a fallacy. But the second piece of it, right, as he says, race is the child of racism, not the father. He's really trying to help us to understand that, you know, racism itself it is the sort of mentality around it is our problem. More than anything else, maybe not more than anything else, but in great concert with everything else, is how we think about it, how we acknowledge the idea of racism first and foremost, that it exists, that we are in many cases a part of, either purposely or against our intention. And that really what we are talking about here is beyond any one courtroom, any one court case, and any one individual. Part of the challenge I think that a lot of us have had sort of in the aftermath is that a lot of people sort of going around and celebrating as if everything has changed. In essence, really almost nothing has changed other than the possibility of change. But again, to go back to our Torah portion, I think one of the most powerful pieces of this to me in the reading of the Or HaChaim on this week's text is to sort of see ourselves in the role of the litigants, not in the role of the judges, right? Again, that we concern ourselves with sort of saying, well, if we fix the justice system, if we fix the judges, if we fix the law, yes, those things are necessary. There are changes that must have happen. But ultimately speaking, those things may be thinking about it also entirely in the wrong way, that we are not seeing ourselves in our role in the courtroom and the ways in which we subtly and intentionally, and sometimes, as I said, even unintentionally, manipulate the system to our effect, either to protect ourselves from responsibility or to put too much responsibility on others to handle the problems. Ultimately, what we witnessed that happened to George Floyd, and that has happened to so many others and continues to happen to this day, is not solved by one court case or by one judge or one jury. Ultimately speaking, what we have to see ourselves as is, again, litigants before God for the sake of justice. And are we standing and being honest with ourselves? Are we actively and really intentionally engaged in trying to reorder and restructure our society in such a way that racism and the effect on race is no longer a driving force in the way that our country and our world ultimately operates? And I think that if we can use this really what is a mitzvah, it's a commandment, it's an obligation not to render unfair decisions and judgment, right? Not to create an avel b'mishpat in that circumstance, and to see ourselves again in the courtroom and in that place, and to ask ourselves the really hard questions about, are we being honest? And are we really being truthful about where we all see ourselves in this mess that we have created really again since the beginning of humanity to some degree, and is manifested in some truly horrific ways in this country and especially in our history. So I think we are at something of a turning point, certainly an opportunity, and certainly for the sake of the family of George Floyd and those that knew him personally, to understand what the experience was and the emotional roller coaster of this week. But lest we all sit around and pat ourselves on the back and say that everything is done and everything is fine, this pasuk stands in very stark contrast to that. As I often say, right, there wouldn't be a mitzvah for it, there wouldn't be an obligation for it, a necessity for it, or a commandment for it, unless it was necessary, unless it was to counter something that we tend to do otherwise. And I think right now, we have allowed an avel b'mishpat to happen under our noses for far too long. I think we need to see this again as a wake-up call of sorts for those of us that probably have not really been honest enough about our role in all of this. And as I said, most importantly, not to hang our responsibility solely on the coat of the judge or on the jury or on the system itself, but to at least take an equal responsibility on us as the individuals of the society that builds the laws and the institutions that have allowed this kind of stuff to take place for far too long. So I hope that in each way, for each of us, that this weekend, as we study this idea of kadoshim, of being kadosh, of being sacred, of trying to pursue that concept, that we remember that as long as we live in a society in which people are treated differently because of the nature of their skin, or because of their ethnic background, or the way in which they practice their religion, as long as there is an imbalance in our justice in that way, then we are not where we need to be. And we're at the moment not anywhere close to where we need to be. So let's certainly take, I think, some stock of what happened this week. Let's process as best as we can, and let's get back to work. And to really live out this idea of Kedoshim in each way and each day, not just for the Jewish community, not just for our community, but for this country that we love and for this humanity that we share. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll invite you to join me now on page 570 as we continue to mark the counting of the Omer, as we count from the second day of Pesach all the way to the holiday of Shavuot, which is rapidly approaching, as they say. And you're welcome to join with me. Again, first at the top of the page, we have an intention setter, and then the bracha, and then we mark the days themselves. Hineni muchan u'mezuman lekayem mitzvat aseh shel sfirat ha'omer. I am ready to fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu al sfirat ha'omer. We praise you, Adonai, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to count the Omer. Hayom shiva ve'esrim yom shehem shisha v'shavuot v'shisha yamim la'omer. Today is 27 days, which is 3 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. So we'll turn now to page 586 as we sing together Aleinu, beginning at the very bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot, Velo samanu kemishpechot adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonaham, vanachnu korim umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz v'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. I'll invite those at home who are in mourning or observing a yahrzeit to rise in body or spirit as we first mark those and remember those who have passed in recent months. Miles Ambrose, Morris Dickstein, Fred Eber, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Furman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Phyllis Katz, Jeanette Kopp, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Danielle Lisa Rigg, Geraldine Rosen, Paul Silver, Virginia Tizer, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, and Ann Weiss. We also marked the yard sites that occurred during the last week for William Bennett, Muriel Binder, Evelyn Block, Stuart Danoff, Corey Ehrlitz, Nancy Fisher, Clara Fleischer, Goldie Friedman, Mae Froman, Lillian Gluckman, Herman Golden, Sylvia Goldsmith, Abraham Goldstein, Ruth Grossman, Teresa Jacoby, Gerald Cass, Evelyn Katz, my beloved grandmother Molly Kessler, Morris Chris, Miriam Krotman, Corinne Lamchick, Jack Lieberbaum, Rose Mazel, Nathan Meyerson, Margie Pollock, Dorothy Rach, Carol Reagan, Lillian Saperstein, and Vera Shaps. If you have other names of anyone for whom you're remembering tonight that we didn't mention, you're certainly welcome to add them to the chat or hold your loved ones in your hearts as we join together in saying the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach cherutei v'yanlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'li'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. If you're still standing at home, you can be seated. And it's my pleasure to welcome back our co-president, Ron Klausner. I'm going to add Ron and ask him to unmute. Who's going to do our announcements for this evening. Ron, welcome back. You look good. You look well rested. Let's make sure you can unmute, you know.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Tomorrow morning service will be live streamed at 10 a.m. Join us on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Archived versions will be available for viewing shortly after each service ends. Then please join us for Torah study at 12 p.m. with Rabbi Dan. A big treat this Sunday at 7 p.m. A very entertaining evening with a one-woman tribute show to the fabulous Fanny Bryce. Enjoy classic show tunes, good old-fashioned fun and hilarity as we travel through time with Fanny Bryce, the legendary Jewish comedian, Ziegfeld Follies, Broadway star, recording artist, and film actress extraordinaire. Knit a Mitzvah is on Monday at 11:30 a.m., Hebrew school at 4 that day, and the Social Justice Committee will meet virtually at 5. Rabbi Dan's class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets is on Wednesday at 12 p.m., and the B'nai Mitzvah class will meet that day at 4 p.m. Rabbi Dan's class, A Journey to the Heart of the Siddur, is on Friday at 9 a.m. The May calendar is now complete and printable from our weekly e-blast. We look forward to a series of 3 presentations about veritable benches, as Toby, our cultural program chair, refers to them. There's a film on Saul and Ruby's Holocaust Survivors Band, a program about Bob Hope in World War II, and another film about Universal Pictures founder Carl Laemmle, including a Q&A with the filmmaker. Very special. Toby, you're doing a great job. There will also be a Social Justice Committee sponsored panel discussion on prosecuting hate, a conversation for the community, which will include members of the New County Hate Crimes Task Force. And on May 16th, keep that date, we mark a very exciting moment in Temple Adas Israel's history. It's the beginning of our major building renovation with a virtual groundbreaking, that will be live streamed for all to witness. That's May 16th. Look for details on these and all our other programs and events in our weekly e-blasts and on our website calendar. If you're not getting our emails, please let the temple office know. We welcome you to join us after services tonight for a virtual Oneg Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. Ron, it's great to have your enthusiasm back. We missed you while you were gone, but
No, thank
I'm
you.
excited. I'm ready to go for all this stuff. That's wonderful.
Me
Really.
too.
But welcome back. I'm glad you got a little bit of rest, but as you told me once, right? No rest for the weary. So right back to it.
Plenty of time to rest.
All right. Well, give Annie my best, the whole family my best, and we'll mute you and give you a little break there. So, Cantor Lauren, we have a closing song tonight before Kiddush.
We do. Oh, say shalom limrama, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Oh, say shalom limrama, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael.
Shalom, indeed. Indeed. So if you have a glass near you, grape juice, wine, or just your powerful imaginations, you can turn to page 123 and join me in Kiddush as we sanctify the moment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam morei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'yava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh bereshit ki hoyom techila lemikrae kodesh Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, Ki banu v'acharta, Leotanu kidashta, Mikol hamim, V'shabbat kodshecha, V'ahava uvratzon inchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. Okay, L'chaim and Shabbat Shalom. And we'll let everybody unmute. And we'll say goodnight to our streaming friends. Good Shabbos to you. Hope to see you tomorrow.